Adrian Ling. I'm a lifelong vegan. I'm 52. My father was born in 1919 and became a vegan around 1926, 27, when he was a little boy. So I've been vegan all my life, which gives me a kind of a slightly different perception to a lot of people who have and are joining in. Is it not very bright? Is that me? It'll warm up. We'll get some colours going. So today I would just like to talk to you really about where Plamil Foods and the start of veganism happened. You may have seen, you may know about some history of vegans, how it started, and also the history of the company that came out of the Vegan Society, and some of the characters involved. I will come back to this at the very end. Some of the characters that actually formed Plamil Foods, which it later became, actually started with Donald Watson, 1944, you may know this, where he actually created the Vegan Society. One of the big concerns about that Donald Watson had and another of others had, as they were part of the Vegetarian Society at the time, and they really wanted to have an alternative to the dairy milk. They didn't want to consume, they saw the really bad things that were happening to animals. So it was really about the compassion and everything else. And you have to remember, this was actually in the Second World War. Rationing at its height and everything else. Part of everything is all about perspective as well. The times that it was happening, and now we have the internet, now we have communications, much faster. You have to appreciate everything then happened a lot slower simply because of this communication. So there are a lot of people, characters that were involved and go through and created what we now have as veganism. But it all started with a very few people coming out and coming from the same type of philosophy. They didn't know each other. How were they going to meet? Most were part of the Vegetarian Society. Most of them were based in London. And later on, there are a number of characters such as Eva Batt, Kathleen Janaway, who you may read up about, you may see. There are a lot of other people that I won't actually name today. A lot of important people. Some have been lost a little bit in history, and everything you read on the web is interesting, but never quite take it as being absolute fact. There are a lot of things that I have seen that is stated as being history, to which I know wasn't quite like that, wasn't quite like this. How do I know that? Sometimes I was actually there. Things 70s, 80s, I'm thinking to myself, that is just not how I remember it. But it is interesting, and I would suggest you go onto the web and you have a little look about what's going on. It really comes from ethical. These people had a stand about what was ethical. This was part and parcel of what they felt was right and wrong, and the definition of ethical is really this distinction between right and wrong. It's a very powerful thought when you consider, should I make a right choice or should I make a wrong choice? And these people were taking these choices as much as they could within the confines of what they do and the choices that they had. And this is why I believe ethical is continuously moving and changing its status, because it's not necessarily what was ethical then. The choices that they could make at the time and what we can make now, we may have the same choices, we may not. But they are all right or wrong choices based on what we can do. And nothing is absolutely black or white. There's always grey in there somewhere. But you have to try and make the right choice. And so everything starts as the ethical point of view. When Donald Watson created what he then was the Vegan Society, they immediately formed a subcommittee. And in this subcommittee was a man called Leslie Cross, there was my father, and there was a guy called Barry Green. Now, they were very concerned about the nutrition, particularly of children, and wanted to produce a alternative to dairy milk. That was their real big focus. And that was what they were set up to do, and that was not actually the Plantmilk Society. That was a subcommittee of the Vegan Society, and that was back in about 1945. In UK, rationing, food rationing, was still around until 1954. And after the war, lots of people doing lots of different things. Lots of people were moving about. My father actually left London and he went into a place called Wales, which is a couple of 100 miles away, and he actually was part and created a company making biofuels from sunflower seeds. They set up a big manufacturing plant because they actually saw that this was a good way of making fuel. Now, this is back in the 1950s. Unfortunately, they kind of run out of business by the fuel companies, and that never actually took off the ground after a number of years. But one of the big investors into that later invested into Plamil. Leslie Cross, he was doing his own thing at that time, and then in 1956, Leslie Cross placed an advert in the vegetarian magazine and said, can we form some sort of group to look again at producing a non-dairy milk? My father saw this advert, he went to the meeting, as did about 30 others. On arrival, Leslie Cross, recognising my father from the meeting that happened 10 years earlier, said, well, can you be the chair of the meeting? So my father said, yeah, okay, I'll be the chair of the meeting. And in that, they decided 4 things, and one of those was to call themselves the Plantmilk Society. And that's the actual start of where it happened. A few months later, and you can see this on the web, the article in the London Evening News occurred, and this is extremely rare photo. You can't actually see it. Sorry, you can't read it. But it was obviously noted by the society at the time of how important it was, and it was notarized that this actually was on the 14th of September 1956. You can actually read it. I could actually read it when you close up. And it basically says this is where it all started from. Now, one thing that's really interesting about some of the pictures that I'm going to show you is they were only discovered in one of Leslie Cross's bags. He died in 1979 in the loft of a house of his son John Cross, and they were discovered this week. So this has not actually ever been seen before. It's quite amazing. When we were going through some of the documents this week, it really brings home the communications and how easily we actually communicate now and today. Some of the documents, how they communicated, was just so slow. It would take a week to transfer an idea. How they would do that with people who were even a few miles away, a letter would be sent. I think we've gone wrong there somehow. A letter would be sent, probably got bored, has it? A letter would be sent, it would be notarised on the top, and another letter would come back. It took forever to exchange what you and I would do in a text message or in a group Skype. It is quite amazing how anything ever got done, to be honest, and the time scale that it took to do anything. So, in this article, it actually states that a milk from soya had been discovered in the States, brought back by someone who went to China, and leaf protein, and it reported about the society as well. This actually apparently led to somebody else coming to the society and suggesting that they use leaf protein. So oddly, the actual part of the write-up where it talks about soya was not actually taken up, and this gentleman, Fairclough, came along and said, why don't you make milk or something and gain protein from other sources? 1957, they actually started to experiment. They were given a premises on a garden centre by a Mr. Lucas, who remained a director of Plamil until 10 years ago, I'm guessing, and knew him very well. This was in a place called Langley in London. Later got demolished, the M4 motorway. This is the very first experiment of making a non-dairy milk, as far as we know, in Europe. This was made from cabbages, and they were trying to extract the cabbage protein from the leaves, and they were reasonably successful, although the amount of energy it actually took to extract the protein was quite high. And here on the left is Leslie Cross, and on the right a gentleman called Hugh Franklin, who was a developer and had far more practical knowledge than Leslie Cross on the left, or my father. Leslie Cross was more practical than my father as well. My father was really an accountant, probably through his whole life in that sense, and probably couldn't find one end of the screwdriver to the other. So here they are examining the first ever production as well. Quite amazing sort of photographs. Then you can't read any of this, and I'm not going to but in the paperwork there are documentations about the first lab report that happened on the first productions, and it talks about some of the technicalities, and they were very, very interested in the nutritional properties, and they went into it in a great deal of detail. And again, it highlighted how slow some of these communications happened. Going on from that, here's a picture that I find quite fascinating. They'd actually got to a production of a cabbage-based milk. And here they are, actually trying to, they were still experimenting, and there's a picture, in the background there is Leslie Cross and a guy called Bill Stark, who was a very practical man. He and his wife got very much involved in it as well. The funding of all this research was given and made by a number of individuals. This is about 1958, and between 1956 and about 1960 they spent £20,000 on research. I don't know what that is in today's terms. I haven't calculated, and I'm afraid I can't recalculate into kronas, but it's a vast amount of money, a huge amount of money even in today's terms, to do what they were doing. And they spent a number of years doing this. We do not know how full-time it was or anything else, but we do know they experimented with a number of different foods that were available. And you have to again remember, this is all in context of just after the war, in a sense, although it's the late 60s. Food rationing had only stopped a few years earlier, and they were making this from, this was cabbages. They also experimented with peas and other types of green vegetables. And have a little picture there, and I can only imagine that they're dropping the cabbages into some sort of mincing unit that's pulping it and collecting the liquids. What is actually apparent from what I know, I never actually saw this, John Cross did, is they had quite a lot of equipment, so they were quite well invested, but it was all donated. I noticed in the little write-up it was about soy milk that was distributed in bottles, and they did something like that, and I've never actually seen that. But what I have actually seen is a write-up by my father that actually talked about, for a very limited time, they distributed the milk that they produced in cartons around the London area, and it was a short shelf life product. It lasted 2 or 3 days, and as you can imagine, the numbers of people actually it was able to get to was very small. Again, communications about availability and everything else. This picture actually, it took me about the 10th time to look at it to realise that actually she's filling a carton. And so it actually shows that what my father actually wrote about in a tiny little sort of script was actually true. She actually filled a carton and distributed in cartons. I can only imagine they were wax-lined cartons because glass was pretty rare as well at some points. And good British tradition, they obviously sit down to have a cup of tea in the factory, and I think this is quite funny, really. Only Brits could do that, and at the time, of course, I noticed the only woman that's standing up getting the milk is the woman, which is pretty sad as well. But anyway, on the right here is also John Cross, who is still alive, and we are in communication. And these photographs, as I say, come from his father's collection, and we are actually going through a lot of them in the last few weeks. With the net and with communication, it is actually becoming increasingly interesting about the history, and people are posting things on the web and in various formats. And so we are going to try and get together some very more detailed things about what happens, and we will be posting them at some point and making a visual history. A more formal picture, we don't know when this is from, about 1960, something of that nature. And there's Hugh Franklin on the left, my father's second from the left. We have no idea who these other 3 people are. However, they are obviously inspecting a can. Now, not relevant particularly, other than that actually the machine they're standing next to is a can labeler, and that is one that Plamil had until about 10 years ago. And it was typical that some of these machines lasted for a long time. So we actually know this was about the canning, and we believe this was something to do with when they had more formally changed over to the idea of producing a milk in cans and from soya. It was obvious that in the 50s, again, I know you can't see it, and I'm just doing it. They were obviously in possession of papers, and this is one from India, in which it actually mentions the production of soy milk and groundnut milk, and this was dated 1956. So they were obviously aware and looking at these types of productions. Again, the productions of groundnuts in the food manufacture of 1954. What became clear is that the productions of cabbage milk and everything else wasn't really working. It didn't actually produce a very good sellable product, and they'd spent a lot of money and they'd run out of money basically, and then from that they then decided that they must actually move forward. And my father actually was then one that decided that we must make a commercial product, it must go out to people, it must be sold. The way of actually reducing the cruelty and everything else, why we are vegan, is to make an economic difference as well. This is really important today. Buying a vegan product means you're not buying a non-vegan product. You make an economic impact. So there was a big discussion about actually producing something that people can buy and moving it forward, and being nutritious as well. And here we just have the documentation of the lineup of the first set of machinery. Again, not overly relevant, except they've really just discovered about it. But what to me is interesting is that the lineup of equipment was very, very small, as opposed to the equipment that they had originally. There was obviously a big shrinkage in funding and availability, and they had to move forward with what they actually had. Some of you may recognise this. We're coming along a little bit further to the 60s and 70s. They had designed from a Sunday Times cartoonist, gave them this picture, and this was used on Plamil products for many, many years, until someone actually pointed out that when it was sold into a European country and they couldn't read an English label, they'd see a cow and a calf, and it would actually be thought to be something to do with cow's milk. So this was then taken away from the packs at that point, when there was start to be a little bit more international sales of the product. So they moved from the Langley, and they decided they have to make actual product to sell, and they moved to a premises in Folkestone. Folkestone is very near France. They bought an old dairy with a number of contributors, about 16 contributors to fund it all. Quite basic, but they had then distinctly chosen soya. Soya had always come along to be an important and nutritious alternative. This was really important to them to also add vitamins and calcium. Vegans, it had been known since the very, very early days that there could be some deficiencies. Actually, when 1944 Donald Watson started, they were entering a period where nutrition wasn't as advanced as it was now. It was only a number of years later that vitamin B12 was actually discovered, and there were reports of some early vegans after a number of years having some problems. B12 was one of them. So that they formulated the product, and always were very, very keen to actually concentrate on vegan nutrition, and this was very, very important to the company, because they were responsible and ethical, not to just produce a milk that was a social replacement, but one that had nutrition for children. And this is the point where I actually do remember a lot of this setup, equipment, and people. So I actually was taken into sort of the factory, I don't know, when I was 4 or 5 years old, something like that, and so it's sort of in the blood in a sense. Other shots of machinery that were used, and here we have cans being cooked. They were cooked in a steam cooker, long shelf life, but it was only 184 cans. I actually used this machine myself, 184 cans at a time, and that took about 3/4 of an hour to make. If you do the maths, that's a lot of numbers of batches for a lot of people, and quite clearly this type of production could not sustain either a company or the growing number of vegans and people interested in having this type of product. Very inefficient, very unprofitable, but still, it was still a great struggle to get people to buy and have products that were seen to be non-dairy. A lot of doctors would say, oh, there's nothing, there's nothing wrong with your child, it's not a dairy allergy, it's not this, not that. So it was very difficult to sell the product. And at the time, of course, you couldn't call it soy milk. This was one of the other big social difficulties. And other products, I'll just deviate slightly. Other products that were made at the time was a soya cream and a savoury type product as well. And we actually discovered these in a deep store earlier this year. They are unopened and they must be the oldest cans of vegan production ever, I think. They probably go back 30, 40 years, something of that nature. Well, they sound okay. We're not quite sure. We don't want to open them. It seems a shame. What do? Do you open them or not? One of the first labels, liquid fluid of plant origin. Sounds yummy, doesn't it? Really nice. They weren't allowed to call it soy milk. They weren't allowed to call it this. They weren't allowed to call it that. And this was a really big problem of getting over marketing message and everything else. We actually see this today as well. It is an ongoing problem of how you actually describe something and how accurate you are in the description. The EU, although we won't discuss Brexit, the EU have helped in a lot of ways, but actually later on stopped people calling it soy milk, and I'll show you that. But the next one here is a label you might be able to read. I don't know much about this label. We do know that some was exported. We don't know how much, how long, or the actual time it was, but in the files there is this label, and I do believe that Sweden is the first country that Plamil ever exported to. HKC are still a company, they're still going, and they are still around. I'm probably pretty sure they're not at this address. This is all back, as I say, in about 1970. We don't know when this was. If anybody can give us a guide on when that was, that would be great. If someone stands up and says, yes, I remember that, that would be great as well. I doubt it. This was my father in the office, probably a photo he would like to have seen of himself. As I say, didn't know one end of the screwdriver to the other, but was very determined and very interested in nutrition, and published a lot of work even through the 80s about infant nutrition and feeding children on soy milk and things like that. That all stemmed back from the very, very early desire to have a nutritious product back in the early. It's interesting to note that, of course, when other soy milks came along, the very first ones had no nutritional qualities other than it was a dairy-free and made from soya. Again, this is, I believe this is the first pack that I know of that I have ever seen of soy milk by Plamil in Tetra Paks, the modern style, and this was 1983. I remember this well. This was another set of equipment, another set of production. Again, interestingly, it was still called soya plant milk. It was not called soya milk. It was always done in a concentrated format to save money, to ecological and everything else. The next one. Suddenly, a year later, soya milk appears. Obviously, something had changed. I can't remember what it was, but it was allowed to be called soya milk. Again, B12 was something that was highlighted at the time. And this was about the time when another company called Granos Foods actually manufactured soya milk. They did not add vitamins, they did not add calcium. And veganism was starting to happen. People were starting to have different types of soya milk in a diet that was becoming more socially acceptable, becoming a little bit more trendy. A couple of years later, and I collected packs at the time, I went to the drawer and I probably have 50 different brands of soya milk. Everybody was making a soya milk, and it was all basically crushed soybeans, and that's all it was. Going on, 1993 again, this was other packs of soya milk, still called soya milk at that time, until the EU decided that it could not be called milk because milk was from cows, and that was the only way you could have and describe milk. So then, whilst you, I, and nearly everybody in the world calls it soya milk, actually on the packet you will not see the name soya milk at all on anybody's packs. It is all officially called soya or something else, or oat or something else, but you won't find it called milk. Great shame, and I believe the EU are going to be looking at it as well again, because it's such a common name. But it's a crazy situation that you have probably one of the most common products now, and everybody talks about soy milk, and yet manufacturers can't put it on the label. At that time, Plamil then started to go into other products, and we'd always been interested in other products. Even in the early records, there are talks about sausages, soya products, all kinds of things that you see today, spreads and things. They had a great deal of ideas, but very little money. That was one of the really, really big problems in how do you get money to develop new products. You have to sell what you do, and if you're not selling many because there aren't many customers, then that becomes a really big issue. But it started to go into egg-free mayonnaise. Egg-free mayonnaise was recognised to be something that actually, eggs being a big vegan issue, and Plamil have never shied away of actually going to producing products that are the hardest to produce. So we see soy milk, for instance, and as you'll see later, chocolate, and we'll come on to chocolate, why chocolate is so difficult to make as a vegan product. Get to, I think about 1980, something like this, and this is the launch of a mayonnaise product. My father's on the right. The three people in the centre there, the three gentlemen in the centre, the one second to right is a gentleman that started Alternative Mat in Norway, introduced and became one of the largest Norwegian companies to distribute both Plamil products and organic. The taller gentleman, third from the right there, is Leonard Olsson, who started Kummakata in Sweden, and he promoted Plamil a lot, still does, and has actually become one of my best friends. The chap second to the right there is a Finnish gentleman, Henrik Nyberg, who is doing the same in Finland, and he's OY Microbios. They were known as, in the trade, the Scandinavian health mafia. Don't know why, but they even had a card with dark glasses on them. So we started producing, selling internationally, and again, one of the biggest exports to Plamil was into the Scandinavian market. Looking at nutrition again, it was sugar was a big issue, so we started to take sugar out of soy milk, and we started producing soy milk with apple juice and various different sweeteners. And this is a very terrible picture of some very handsome young guy here with some UK grown soya beans. We actually got involved in a project to promote and grow soya beans in Europe. When the Iron Curtain came down, there were a number of universities actually in Russia that had seed banks of soybeans that were able to be grown on the same latitude as we are. They are very basically the same. And so a lot of work was done at a Y college near where we are based to grow soya in the UK. That spread to many other countries. Soya is now widely grown in Europe. Unfortunately, in the UK, soybeans weren't quite big enough to make soya milk. They were tended to be too small because of the climate. Still working on it. But we sold them in packs anyway for people to have, and it was quite a pioneering time as well. But unfortunately, they didn't quite work out. But as you see now, there's soya all over Europe that is grown in Europe. Plamil only use organic soybeans grown in Europe. We experimented with other proteins, very interestingly, going back to pea protein and cabbage protein in the early days. It was very good product, tasted a little of peas and things like that and beans. It was stopped because of bacteriological problems in the peas. So a lot of it was invested into this product, and we made this type of product for about 4 or 5 years. There was a spoilage bacteria that couldn't be got rid of even in a UHT process. And there again is a very nice handsome man on the right and my father on the left. This is where we were producing and selling even yogurts and other products from them. I can't remember the date about this photograph at all, but it's very interesting because it has cans in it, it has chocolate in it. It's one of the first ones where we have a range of chocolate. Plamil were the first company in the UK to produce organic chocolate. We had made dairy-free chocolate for many years. Chocolate was decided to be made because and invested in again because it was known that even in dark chocolate there could be contaminants of dairy milk. That is still a big issue today. Even the UK government did some research 2 years ago, and that there was still significant contamination of dairy milk in even dark chocolates. I'll come back to that a little bit. There's a little sign. I see we're running out of time, and if you'll have to ask me any questions. We are a manufacturer that really is into quality and quality issues. We get certified, we're a soil association, we're fair trade, we're OOTS certified. OOTS is a standard of cocoa. Into sugar, trying to reduce the amount of sugar that people are having. A couple of things about this is the quality that we actually manufacture is really important. To do what you say and to only do what you say and don't do anything else. Standards back to ethical. Do not claim things you're not able to claim or you're not able to substantiate is a very important part of ethics. And I will come on to the vegan symbol in a very short period. I would say here that we, Plamil, we do not produce raw chocolate, or we don't claim raw anyway. Whilst we sympathise and we like the idea of raw in many formats, I've been in the cocoa industry for 30 years. I do not believe, if I see raw chocolate, I do not believe it has been made to any standards that you can keep as raw. There are no standards to it. It can be a term that is bandied about. It is very common, and one that I do believe will have problems because of its definition. The UK government say, Plamil, your products are all raw. The way you produce it, you can claim raw. We do not, because we do think there are real big problems in how it's governed, how it's controlled, and there are a lot of people that actually think it's a law when it isn't. So quality standards and keeping the ethics of doing what you say you're going to do and only doing that is important. Coming on to vegan. The Vegan Society and Plamil started at the same time. We have roots. I've been on the Vegan Council for 5 or 6 years back in the 80s. We actually then launched, when I was on the council, the Vegan Society logo, which you may also all be familiar with. And later on, the Vegan Society decided that within their trademark they would allow contamination of milk into products, and that is into particularly chocolate. I wasn't on the council at the time. We still don't understand the reason why they allow milk, and therefore you can see the Vegan Society logo together with products that say may contain dairy. Now, to me, that's like saying to an anti-vivisectionist, yeah, but a little bit of experimentation is okay. I don't quite get that philosophy. It is against the Vegan Society's own philosophy, which it says as far as possible. Plamil launched their own logo, which we only use, which we do follow as far as possible. We do license it for free to other companies, and it states that the basic is it can't may contain. To say may contain dairy on a vegan product, to me, is just crazy, basically. The Vegan Society do know my views on this quite clearly. A few shots of just more of the modern Plamil productions, and again, egg-free mayonnaise. Why I've got this is simply because there are egg-free mayonnaises around. They're very, very common. But again, look at the ingredients, look how nutritious they are. And this is one of the really, really big problems of vegan foods nowadays. They are made often in supermarkets. You have to be very careful. They are made to the lowest nutritional standards. They are made to the cheapest possible formulations to get them onto the supermarket shelf. I can see this is going to be a problem in the future, where people and vegans are starting to say, oh, I'm not very well, or something. It's because they've been shopping in the local supermarket and things, and they've bought everything that's vegan, and actually it's a load of rubbish. Why suspect that something is cheap and it's vegan, it's good? It doesn't necessarily go hand in hand. After a fire, just a fire drill, I get everybody out of the factory so I can take a photo of them. This is we have 3 shifts. This is the day shift, so I press the fire alarm, they all run out, and I say thank you very much, I take a photo of them. So it's a good way of doing it. Chocolate, we want to bring chocolate into the mainstream. It is here already. We were the first to produce dairy-free dairy milk chocolate and rice milk chocolate. And again, this product is one for reduced chocolate. We produce a huge amount of bulk chocolate that goes into a lot of other products. I can go into a lot of supermarkets and I can say, yes, that's Plamil product, that's it. And I can see here there's lots of different brands, and I can go around and I think, yeah, well, that's Plamil chocolate, and that's Plamil chocolate, because we sell a lot to many different companies. We do actually sell to many companies that go on to claim their products are raw chocolate, which we do point out in the specifications isn't right. But sugar, we again looking at reductions of sugar, and we produce a great deal of no sugar chocolates. Chocolate spreads as well, very nice if you want to try them. I say I'm running out of time and you might get bored. Again, the 2 big categories that Plamil probably been responsible for in Europe are soy milk and dairy-free chocolate. This has started to be one of those things that we like to do. We put in adverts. If it doesn't taste nice, if it's not very nice, you're not going to get a smile on our face. You have to enjoy it. This is one of the really, really big things. We don't forget where we're coming from and everything else. This is our quality manager, and she was very upset that on this day she wasn't photo ready, and it would be a typical thing where, you know, a bird flutters into the office somehow and she rescues it. She's actually an animal psychologist as well, bizarrely. So she lets me use this photograph. We like to keep involved. We have 5 sites, and we look after, there's a lot of seagulls in our sites. They are protected species. They can be quite dangerous, but so we try and work with them. This was just a sparrow that came in. We have events, sub-events, festivals, vegan foods, all around. Now, why am I showing you a picture of my wife? I get a tree. It occurred to me a lot about this picture was veganism is probably half the age of this tree. It is, in real terms, very, very young. There is a long way to go in veganism. The other point is that the sacrifices made by many people working in the vegan world are quite substantial. My father got divorced, and I kind of believe that it was because he spent too much time on the Plantmilk Society and not much at home, and that is something that has an impact. So when you see people who have been working and they're dedicated in any field, whatever, there is a really big impact that it has on them. And I have to say, I suffered the same. I got a divorce from my first wife, probably for exactly the same reason as dedicating too much time to work. But thankfully, now in a position where I have a wonderful time, but I have to remember that for me as a lifelong vegan, it is work as well, and it is important that there is an outside life and you can enjoy other things as well. And here we are, just having an enjoyment. And you think, well, that's good, 2 people enjoy themselves, classic kind of selfie, having a glass of wine and that kind of thing. Again, you have to be really careful. What is the wine? Is it vegan? What does it have in it? There are all sorts of hidden elements in wines that aren't necessarily vegan. Fish being one of them, even pig's blood, I believe, as well. All sorts of things can be in the alcoholic drinks that you drink, and I think vegans will have a big impact on the drink industry, and I think that it could be one that is really the next step. So when you go out, just remember that your beers and your things, that might well not be vegan. Where we go from now, we're probably not seen to be the most trendy company around, and I don't believe it's not because of the products that we make, it's just because we don't probably get our message over. We've been around too long, and you kind of forget some of the messages, and some of the other products seem to be a little bit more trendy. We are looking at this, and these are proposed sort of pack designs. Again, where we come over about the ethics and sustainability of the products. New products, fun products, which you might see in Sweden, don't know. These are ones, some eggs I think were here, some bunny packs as well next year. The ethics and sustainability. Donald Watson, you might, I don't know how many of you can read this, talked about various things and was quite a personal and private person. I met him twice with my father. He didn't have a lot to do with the Vegan Society after he created it, a few years after. He was a very private person. And I'll let you read that if you like. Apparently I said this year about we should celebrate the advancement of continuous progress of vegan choice offers, for there's no doubt veganism is the ethical choice, but ethics should not be a static concept. So we come back to this ethical thing I was talking about at the beginning. It's always moving forward. You always have choices that are different tomorrow than you had today. Little advert, this is where the Plamil products are available in Sweden. So, go on behind. This is something that I created at the beginning of last month. I had the idea that with all the symbols and with all the vegan things there are around, they all say vegan, they're all trying to get a message across. And it seemed to me that there was no very plural vegan image that people could use on social networks and everything else, and everybody takes photographs and you can go to places, and I can only describe it as the rainbow flag is very well known. Vegans don't have a rainbow-ish flag, and we should have a colour symbol that can be used everywhere, that is available to everybody. You can, any group can go and put their name on it, any message they like, but the colour codes and the colour combination is easily recognisable. So if you're going out and you saw this, you think, oh, there might be some vegan food in that restaurant, there might be something else. It can be used anywhere and anything. So I launched this last week, sent it to the press, it seems to be quite well received. But it would be great that if veganism can have a one united symbol that incorporated everybody's point of view. Everybody has a slightly different point of view what veganism is. Everybody has their own standards. But it doesn't really matter, because if we can all make that little bit of difference, we can always reduce the animal suffering, and we can get to a sustainable world. Thank you very much.